Hey everyone, this is your favorite history buff, and we are traveling with history. Today I want to cover Thomas Jefferson. This will be the first of 3 parts of his life in the presidential series. I hope you all enjoyed this. We're going to dive into the life of a genius. But for now, why don't we start at the beginning? Hope you're all ready. Let's begin. I want to cover things like the beginning of his life, his birth and education. I cover his home Monticello, his love and marriage, his affairs, the Declaration of Independence, his political careers, his life as a diplomat, Secretary of State, and Vice President. Now, I forgot to say, this may not be for kids, especially on the affairs part, so viewer discretion is advised. Now, talk about his life. He was born on his father's plantation April 13th, 1743, near Blue Ridge Mountains. Parents were Peter Jefferson and Jane Randolph. And his father died when he was only a teenager. He inherited his 500 acres and plenty of slaves. Even in the beginning of his life, he was brilliant. He studied many languages, Greek and French, Latin. He studied other subjects, math, history, and eventually he entered the College of William and Mary, 1760. It was hence a highly religious school. Couldn't get a degree in that unless they were in the ministry. It'd be Anglican church, or if you want to be a professor. So he studied law under George Wythe in 1762. Eventually became a successful lawyer, and was elected in the Virginia House of Burgess. Deal was dissolved by the British. Hence tensions, American Revolution. This is about Monticello, his home that stands to this very day. Started in 1768. He directed that the top was to be cleared on the mountain, 168 foot above Shadwell. And, of course, most bricks and other materials were imported from England. He would not have that. Actually, he had them American made, American brought. So, there's also with the buildings being mostly nails, lumber, stones, limestones, all made on the site. Training in architecture? Well, he read a lot of books on it, so he was more self-taught on this area. House was built to his specifics, his personal design. It changed over the years, especially when he went to Europe later on, inspiring neoclassical architecture. But that's a little later. How about I move on to the next part? This is the love of his life, Martha Wells Skelton, born to John Wells, Martha Epps Wells, and a plantation known as the Forest. Sadly, her mother died when only she was a week. Her mom was from an influential family, father a slave owner. At first, she was married to Bathurst Skelton, November 20th, 1766, and they had a son, November 7th, 1767. But he sadly passed away, making Martha the widow. Her and her son moved back to the Forest plantation, and sadly their son passed away later on. Thomas Jefferson, of course, grew attracted to her, courted her. December 1770, they were married. January 1st, 1772, a few years later. They had 6 children together, but only 2 daughters. Martha Jefferson, otherwise known as Patsy, and Mary Jefferson, otherwise known as Polly as a kid, and Maria as an adult. They're the only 2 that lived to adulthood. And, well, she passed away September 6, 1782. one of the down points of his life, losing the woman he loves. But, talk about it, some of his affairs. The most known one is his relationship with Sally Hemings. She was 14 years old when this began. They had 6 kids together. Their descendants number. But there was also the part where Sally was the half-sister to Martha Wells. So, I guess he was married to one and enslaved the other. And, of course, Maria Causeway was English. She knew more Italian than English. And she was married to another man, Thomas Jefferson. When he was in Europe, he courted her, wrote her romantic letters. Now, whether they slept together or not, don't know. There's no proof for or against. But she was one of countless married women he had intimacy with. That romance ended when he went back to the United States. It's just the kind of guy he was. He loved the ladies. But beyond that, he also did love his family. And to be fair to Maria, her husband did cheat on her. Though that's no reason for infidelity, but that's what happened. Anyways, how about to the next slide? The Declaration of Independence. Now you see, Thomas Jefferson was nominated by John Adams to write it. A Virginian, of course. Nominated by someone from Massachusetts. This would, of course, show the independence of the United States, which would become a country. And through some rough drafts by Congress, June and July, before finally being voted in on the 4th of July, our Independence Day. That's 1776. All men are created, as the saying, regardless of birth, wealth, or status. Although Jefferson did write that down, he predicted correctly that there would be challenges, hence with slavery. And he was a slave owner himself, despite struggling with the conscience of owning them. This also came from his liberal views of government. I'll talk about that a little later on. He also worked closely with James Madison, a man who would be his future Secretary of State, and ending religious establishment. I say ending the control of it, the tyranny, so to speak. He was also close friends with James Monroe, but a little closer to Madison. That hence had to do with the political views. Anyways, why don't I move on to the next slide? Alright. Now, let me say, yes, he was governor of Virginia, 1779 to 1781. That was 2 terms back then. Originally the capital was Williamsburg, but it was moved to Richmond. He also wrote some notes on the state of Virginia, hence mentioning slavery and religion, and he did not want to run for a 3rd term. This was also during the Revolutionary War, so he retreated from Williamsburg to Richmond, then he retreated from Richmond to his home of Monticello, and he retreated from there. Sadly, his opponents falsely accused him of being a coward. I think the political life stressed him. He wanted to return to a private life as a farmer and to the books he so loved to read. But not everything would work that way, at least not for long, because eventually he'd be thrusted back into politics sooner than anybody would think. And he would play an important role for the war. I'll get to that next. This is when he became the diplomat, 1784. Became a trade commissioner, succeeded Benjamin Franklin as the minister to France, negotiating a commercial treaty with Prussia, which is the most powerful state in Germany back then, 1785. A consular convention with France, 1788. This is where he grew more of the appreciation for the European culture, such as the art, the literature, the architecture, the food and wines, and many other things. You must know, this is what helped him with the designs of Monticello later on. The changing. He was especially pro-French. Despite all that, he did not have such a love for the aristocratic life. But for this trip, he brought his daughters with him. And I believe he brought Sally Hemings and her brother James to learn cooking and, of course, sewing for Sally in her case. Learned a few tricks. I believe James negotiated for his own freedom there. But Sally Hemings, well, she could have possibly had that. She decided to go back with Thomas Jefferson to the United States. That way she got a position of advantage, privileges. So, she wanted her children to be free, and she wanted to be treated better, which Jefferson did slowly fulfill those promises. It's freeing her children and his will later on, I believe. But hey, let me move on to how he also maintained a close friendship with John and Abigail Adams. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, other than being future presidents, were successful diplomats to help with the Revolutionary War. And he also admired the intelligence of Abigail Adams, loved talking to her. I believe he enjoyed company with the young John Quincy Adams as well. John Adams was the minister to Great Britain during the time. I don't believe King George was impressed with Thomas Jefferson as he was with John Adams, but that's not because of intellect. I think that was more of political views by then. John Adams had more of the aristocratic views, and like I said earlier, Jefferson did not. Now, to the next part. About this. When the war was over, I believe Jefferson, many years later, wanted to go back to France. But George Washington nominated him as Secretary of State without talking to him first. Jefferson found this out and reluctantly accepted it. He explained his pro-French views when the rematch between Britain and France started, but Washington wanted to remain neutral, much to his disappointment. He also had a fierce rivalry with the first Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, who was indeed the opposite of him politically. Alexander Hamilton was the follower of the Federalist Party, highly conservative, big government, high taxes, pro-military party, and wanted a centralized bank. Well, Thomas Jefferson, along with James Madison, formed the Democratic Republicans from the Anti-Federalists. Thomas Jefferson was liberal in the sense that he wanted states' rights, small government, lower taxes, less military. He was afraid of a standing army becoming like Britain. He eventually left after such frustrations with Alexander Hamilton, so many fights. Although he still respected George Washington. And then come later on, I believe, it says 1796 to 1801, a little typo. That was supposed to be 1797 to 1801, because the election was 1796. But he became vice president in 1797. The thing was, back then, first place got president, second place got vice president. Jefferson narrowly lost to John Adams. Granted, he won all the South. The key part was New York. And, well, he wasn't really consulted as vice president. Let's just say there are different political views. John Adams was a Federalist, somewhat similar to Hamilton. But let's just say Jefferson wrote a manual of parliamentary practice. It was for legislative proceedings. So he had his useful ways. They both wanted peace during the Quasi-War. They didn't want to go to war with France, but I don't think either one of them knew that about each other. They both tried to work for peace. And when John Adams did the Alien Seditions Act, Thomas Jefferson was against that. That may have been one of the reasons John Adams lost his election in 1800. He was defeated by Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, but there was a tie. Much to the dismay of Alexander Hamilton, who could break the tie. Let's just say he despised both Jefferson and Burr, but he despised Burr more and gave the presidency to Thomas Jefferson. And that's a story for another time. Next time, Part 2, I will explain the entire presidency to the best of my ability, policies and everything. But there will also be some other changes as well. Hence, in the Constitution. I hope y'all enjoyed this. Like and subscribe. And, as always, have a good day. Bye-bye now.